All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach J.K. McLeod, and on today's fitness-focused episode, we are going to be talking about Zone 2 training. I'm here to hopefully not overcomplicate. What's the opposite of not overcomplicate? Simplify. So let's try and do that. Today, I want to bring you my perspective that was inspired by a recent message that I received from a client about identifying their own Zone 2. So hopefully I'm going to try to simplify this for you the same way that I did for them. So before getting into today's episode about Zone 2 training, I, as always, as I do or try to do at the beginning of each episode, want to take a moment to express gratitude and say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I know that you have a lot of different podcast content that you can consume, and maybe you do consume. I just want to say thank you for choosing to press play on Help Me Understand, along with any other podcasts that you may listen to. I would appreciate it highly if you would also make sure that you're not only listening to the podcast, but that you are subscribed to the podcast on whatever platforms you have available to you. Whether you happen to be watching on YouTube, you subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you'll get updates on when new episodes release, along with any sort of exercise, quick demos that I happen to upload, and different things like that on the YouTube channel. And then also, if you happen to be listening on, I think it's pretty much Spotify and Apple Podcasts these days, making sure that you're following the show, I would greatly appreciate it. All right, so let's get into today's episode. And again, as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, I appreciate one of my clients reaching out to me today. I'm actually going to try and pull up this message real quick, and reached out and asked this particular question, which I've gotten some form of this question pretty often. And the question was, so I was looking at some of the Apple Watch features and noticed a heart rate thing under the workout portion on my phone. It has my Zone 2 at 128 to 138. My polar heart rate monitor has my Zone 2 max at 122. I've been using the polar heart rate monitor. Should I keep doing that and not worry about what the Apple Watch says? So just to give a quick answer, and for my clients, I'll typically dig in way more because I have more information to be able to relate to them, understanding all the different aspects of not only their training, but also having more information than I would have for the average person on what their lifestyle is like too, what their goals, different things like that. So just overall, my response to that my general response to that question is to put more stock into your level of perceived exertion during Zone 2 in conjunction with what your wearable is telling you as far as your heart rate zone. So those two pieces together, with really the nod going more to you saying out of a scale of 1 to 10 for exertion, I feel like I'm somewhere around a 4 to 5. Take how you feel along with what the wearable is telling you to formulate your answer on where your true Zone 2 is. And I'll actually give you a couple of suggestions for that later. Put more stock into the combination of those two things versus counting on a specific wearable to tell you, yes, this is exactly your Zone 2. And even, for example, when I look at my own data, I use a couple of different things. I have a Garmin watch that I will wear on my wrist because that's where most people wear watches. And then occasionally I will use a chest strap heart rate monitor. Now that chest strap actually will communicate with the Garmin. It's a different brand. It's like some generic that I got off of Amazon, but it does come with it has an app that goes along with it that gives me what it thinks my Zone 2 is. So something that I didn't even send to my client just as an example, because sometimes it can be helpful to have some data other than your own, just to see like, oh, okay, so it's not just, my combo of devices that has different information. So for example, and I can't even think of the name of the app that's used for my chest strap, but on my chest strap app, it identifies my Zone 2 as 104 to 120. Then my Garmin identifies my Zone 2 as 112 to 129. Now, while those aren't wildly different, where information like this can be confusing is for those who tend to really be driven more by numbers, like those folks who may have that personality type If you're familiar with neurotyping, might be somebody who's more of like a neurotype 3, folks that really like to dig into the numbers and like to do exacts. So that's where things can start to get problematic, is if you're giving the direction of, well, use the talk test and how you feel and things like that. That's something that can be helpful for some, but for others, that can almost cause like more anxiety because they're just more and more worried about doing it wrong, because there's this never ending flow and stream and waterfall of information. It's like a fire hose these days of, here's, you're doing zone 2 all wrong, because this is where I won't completely step all the way onto the soapbox here. I'll kind of maybe put 1 foot on the soapbox. This is where the world of marketing in the fitness industry and the reality of what's helpful for people, where those two things often clash. So in order to really maximize getting views on content, as a coach, you are taught to make definitive and often polarizing statements like, you're doing zone 2 all wrong. That will get somebody to click your video. And then all that does is just completely like drive somebody into a spiral of, well, this person said that it's, your max heart rate is 220 minus your age, and then zone 2 is 65% of that. Yeah, sure, that can be a helpful place to start. And also, is that the most helpful thing in the long run? Probably not, because at some point, we as coaches, let me not put this on somebody else. I, as a coach, should also be encouraging you to be able to own your level of effort and own the information and own the understanding of how to figure some of these things out through collaboration. So, all right, let's bring it back in the road and go through some things that I think will be helpful to help you really nail your zone 2 without completely overthinking the whole thing. So first, let me just start with what zone 2 actually is in just very plain English. So zone 2 in very plain English here is just low intensity work that teaches your body to use energy efficiently, and it gives your heart the kind of steady stress that it needs to get stronger. So if you can talk easily, breathe steadily, and feel like you could keep going, that is the most simple definition I can give you of zone 2 work. So when I talk about the fact that you are going to be providing some stress on your heart, so you're going to be providing stress there, but it's in a way that it's like just slightly stretching that intensity, but it's something that's doable versus something that's like this massive burst, like a high intensity that takes you a long time to recover from. And in each of these things that I want to talk to you about, I'm going to give you a question. I'm going to call these guiding questions, a question that you can ask yourself along the way. So one question that you can ask yourself here is, if the goal is better energy and recovery, why am I choosing a pace that completely drains me? So this is a question that you can ask yourself when you are looking at, first, what's the whole point of doing zone 2? So just think about that. Now, the problem that I tend to see is a decent amount of folks will kind of hover in what we'll call like the almost hard zone. So it's basically where they're not going slow enough to actually build the aerobic base that zone 2 can help you do, but they're also not going fast enough for it to count as high intensity. So they're just kind of hovering in the middle in this gray zone. And the challenge is that gray zone really feels enough to be productive, but it doesn't do enough for your cardiovascular system to actually adapt in a very meaningful way. So hanging out kind of it's not even necessarily that sweet spot. Like it's something it's going so slow that it's not really challenging, but then also but you're not going like so fast that it's high intensity. So people kind of hover in what we call, or what I call at least, like that almost hard zone, and it still is not providing the amount of stress that you need for your cardiovascular system to actually adapt in a meaningful way. So the question that I would jot down here is to ask yourself, do your workouts leave you better off for the rest of your day, or do you feel like you're just kind of checking a box? And when I'm talking about your workouts, what I'm talking about is your zone 2. So when you do your zone 2, ask yourself, is this leaving me better off for the rest of the day? Or is it pretty much just, I checked the box? Because zone 2 is still intentional work. Like, don't get it twisted. All right. Another one that I have for you here is that Zone 2 can offer a number of benefits. And one of the primary benefits is that overall lifestyle factors get a lot easier and more efficient. So both for myself and multitude of clients that I've worked with in the past and currently, many times when we start getting really consistent with that Zone 2, and I'll give you a recommendation for just generally what to look at each week, people tend to report that they have less fatigue. They will report just overall that they feel like their mood is a bit more regulated. They feel like they're in better mood. They also feel like their lifting sessions tend to go a bit better. And even some have reported back feeling like their sleep has also improved. One thing that I want to call out is the folks who have reported back that they feel like their lifting sessions are better. I can think of a couple of very specific examples where what we did, instead of worked with a couple of individuals who were averaging, let's say, lifting weights 4 to 5 times per week. And what we were able to do is move them into a lifting schedule that was more 3 to 4 times per week, and then doing 1 to 2 Zone 2 sessions in the week. And by doing that, what they found is that they found themselves more refreshed and more recharged and ready to hit it harder during the lifting session. So they were getting more out of the lifting that they were doing, even though it was with less frequency. And that was a culmination of things. I'm not going to say it was just because they were doing Zone 2. What I will say, though, is that including that along with other things was definitely helpful. So Zone 2, for those of you who may be really starting to reach that point where the messaging around the importance of rest, or what I call recharge days, maybe it's kind of starting to dig in a little bit more. Like you're just starting to maybe be a little bit more open, and you're not you're not prying, my 5 lifting sessions out of my cold dead hands. You're ready to at least give up one of those days. A good steady Zone 2 session for 20 to 40 minutes is a great way to do that, because you can still get your what I'll call movement fix in, and also that will help you with recovery from the previous session, and then preparation for the next session. So the Zone 2 can really work as kind of the buffer in between your weightlifting sessions. So guiding question here, think to yourself, where in your life would improved capacity tend to show up first? So again, in the example that I talked about with lifting, but for you, maybe it's a situation where ensuring that you've got Zone 2 as part of your training protocol, your training program, could possibly help you in the area of sleep. I think I talked about this in some episodes before. I've posed this question to some of my friends that are coaches before, and I was like, if you could only choose one that somebody they have to, not necessarily have to nail, but if we can't get anything else right, but out of sleep, exercise, and nutrition, which is the one that you're like, hey, you have to get this one at least as close to as best as you can get it. And the argument, exercise went out the window, because even I will confirm, out of those 3, that's going to be the one that I would say, you can kind of subpar that and still, you could still kind of get probably decently close to where you want to be. But the argument, the jury is still out, as the folks say, between which one is the most important between sleep and nutrition. I tend to be on team sleep, being the one thing that you just can't get completely wrong. You can get one wrong every now and then, but you can't get it completely wrong. So, all right, let's move on, because I intend for this one to be a shorter-ish episode. What I want to talk about next is why, when we're talking about Zone 2 and we're talking about inserting it on days that you're not lifting weights, or maybe it's at the end of a weightlifting session, whatever it may be, what I've found is that a decent amount of folks kind of think that Zone 2 becomes optional. So it's the session that gets canceled. It's the one that gets moved around. It's the one that, I'll just kind of get to that thing when I can. And so I really want to throw out that perspective here, or throw my perspective out there, that just because something is intended to be fairly low to moderate intensity doesn't mean that it's optional. your strength sessions, your intervals, and your harder workouts, those things all tend to work better when your aerobic base is actually solid. So understanding that a stronger heart means things like better blood flow, better recovery between your sets, and really just a higher ceiling for overall performance. So not focusing on that and having a weak aerobic base makes everything feel harder than it really needs to. So just make sure that you're asking yourself, like, do I truly understand that just because something doesn't feel super hard, that all of a sudden that means that it's optional? So if you are feeling like you're somebody who is lacking progress, maybe a question to ask yourself is my lack of progress a discipline problem, or is it a capacity problem? Am I trying to do things that I just currently don't have the capacity to do? So am I having trouble recovering from lifting sessions because I just right now don't have the capacity, like the aerobic capacity, to actually recover from 5 lifting sessions per week? All right, then, let's also address what I'm going to call the ego problem. And this is kind of related to the just because it's easy doesn't mean it's optional. The ego problem here that I will see very often is that going slow feels uncomfortable. And maybe this sounds counterintuitive, I think would be the proper phrase here. But for some folks, slowing down and maintaining that slower pace or that maintainable pace for 20 to 40 minutes is more difficult than going balls to the wall for 15 minutes. It's a very interesting concept. So sometimes you have folks that'll just avoid zone 2 because it doesn't look hard. It doesn't feel like it's hard. But with the slower, sustained work, that is exactly what your cardiovascular system responds to. So when your workouts become just these all-out, balls to the wall performances, it's very easy for your progress to stall. And again, I know that this seems like counterintuitive because this really, it kind of flies in the face of just work harder. And I'm a proponent of hard work. In fact, I literally have like a banner behind me. If you happen to be watching on video, I have a banner behind me from a company called Few Will Hunt. And one of the banner says, "Restoring the dignity of hard work." I am a strong supporter of hard work. Team hard work over here. And sometimes that hard work isn't the physical part, it's the mental part of understanding that all progress doesn't come from just trying to use a jackhammer on absolutely everything. Like sometimes you need to build up your base and rest and recharge and recover in order to do the hard work. So just keep that in mind. All right, so here's what I would recommend as far as just a basic, like, practical setup, where the intention is to build up enough volume without really turning it into like a second job that you really don't have time for. Because from my perspective, and my common client avatar is busy adults with responsibilities. Like, that's pretty much who I help. I help busy adults with responsibilities, and that could mean anything from career to family to anything in between. It can be community involvement. It can be a lot of different things, but I help busy people who have responsibilities. And the last thing that we need to do is add more just stuff to do. So what we will do often is really look at where are opportunities where we currently are utilizing our time. We currently have that time, but it's being earmarked towards something that isn't necessarily closing the gap between where I am and where I want to be. How could we use that time a bit more effectively so that it integrates with your lifestyle and also moves you closer to where you actually want to be? So my general suggestion is, for the average, when I say average person, I'm talking somebody who is not necessarily like an endurance, like an ultra runner or a marathon runner. I'm talking like your everyday person who wants to generally stay fit, maybe does a couple of events, once or twice a year. They'll do something like maybe 5K, or maybe they do an event like a Tough Mudder, or they'll hit a season where they're going to train for a High Rocks, things like that. That's all good. However, it's once in a great while. It's not a regular thing. In fact, one of my very best clients who I've worked with for a number of years, she does, I think it's called Ragnar, like the Ragnar race. She'll do that once a year, which is, I can't remember exactly how much mileage it is. I just know it's insane. It's a lot of freaking mileage that they run, and they run a long leg or a couple of long legs of that particular race. And my general suggestion for just really, again, anybody within that general lifestyle area would be a couple of zone 2 sessions a week, minimum one. I'd say a couple would be great, somewhere in the 20 minutes and up range. I'd say 20 to 40 minutes, all good. Things like walking at an incline. So you do, just a flat road walk may not quite be to the level of exertion that we're looking for. So walking on an incline, cycling, for some folks, easy running. I think, again, it can depend on the individual and where their aerobic base is right now. I think those are all perfectly valid for improving your heart health and your energy. And this is definitely going to be, again, one of those things where consistency is going to beat precision. So the guiding question that I will have for folks when we're doing that practical setup, the question I would have you ask yourself is, what version of zone 2 actually fits my real life, not my imaginary, perfect week, the utopian week for me? Like, what version of zone 2 actually fits your real life? For myself, it's getting onto the bike erg at our gym. There's a couple of days a week where I typically will have about, if I've got like a 30-ish minute window between when I coach a class or when I coach a client, and then either need to head home or head into work, I've got maybe a 30 to 50 minute window. Many times, as long as I'm not buying into my own excuses that I'm selling, it's a good time to just hop on the bike and knock out 20 minutes or more of that zone 2. So I think that's a good place to be. So here's the big kicker. How do you know if you're doing it right? And this relates back to the question that my client asked. So how you know you're doing it right? So I do think that heart rate monitors can help. However, I will tell you that something that not only I call, but it's a term that we use in the fitness industry called the talk test, can work fine. So here's the example that I will give. So the example that I give when it comes to a talk test for zone 2 is, hopefully people can relate to this, if you were on a video call. So right now, if I was doing this video call, let's say it's a Zoom call, Teams call, whatever sort of technology that you use, if you were on that call, and one, you wouldn't be able to lead the call because you are definitely still going to be exerting yourself. So let's say that you're incline walking or you are on your bike or on a stationary bike. You could definitely log on to that call. You'd probably have your camera off or some sort of fake thing so they weren't knowing that you were exercising because you're trying to get in some zone 2 while you're working. Hey, I get it. You got to get in where you can. And if you're at zone 2, if you were called on to answer a question and you needed to talk for 1 to 2 minutes, you would be able to talk for the 1 to 2 minutes without your sentences being broken up, without feeling like you were gasping for breath or anything of that sort. You would be able to speak up, make your point, and then take your happy self back on to mute with your camera off, and then keep it rolling. So that's an example that I commonly give in my gym, especially for folks that they're just not quite sure, and they tend to be more like dialed into the exact numbers, like they like percentages and things like that. If we're thinking in terms of rate of perceived exertion, or what we call RPE, on a scale of 1 being super, 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 super easy, 10 being I am about to bust a blood vessel here, then I would say that zone 2 can be anywhere from like 3 to maybe 6. I'd say maybe 3 to 5. Just generally, it feels like a 3 to 5 out of 10. The overall goal of zone 2 is to find that sweet spot where you know that you are exerting energy and you could stay there for at least 20 minutes, probably up to 40 or a little bit more. So you could maintain that. So one of the questions that I had gotten a while back was somebody asking about zone 2 on the rower. And this is where it can, my past experience in working with clients, I will give my bias. And when somebody asked me about that, my response was, I have generally found it difficult for people to remain in zone 2 and row properly, regardless of how low they set the damper, because the row is a full body movement that requires a decent amount of pulling force and leg drive in order to do it properly. So I'm not going to say that you can't do zone 2 on a rower. I'm just going to say I generally find that most people find it very difficult to stay in zone 2 and use proper form on the rower. So that's what I would say with that. But again, just generally, when it comes to zone 2, figuring out, okay, how do I know that I'm doing it right? Think about that talk test, about that example. If you were on a Zoom or a Teams call and they asked you to speak up real quick or chime in, so you chime in and then you use, all your corporate jargon. This is in the parking lot going forward, and we'll circle back and, best wishes, all whatever corporate folks say these days. And then you hop back onto mute and you could keep it rolling. Probably all good. Folks that maybe could take a phone call, talk to a friend, that sort of a thing. But it's something where the friend is probably doing the majority of the talking, and then you just need to chime in every once in a while and you're able to do that. Then that, for me, is a pretty good sign that you are most likely in zone 2. So your heart rate should feel more like it's kind of cruising versus panicking. If that's the case, then you are probably right where you need to be. So the question to ask yourself is just, what's the simplest way for you to track the effort without obsessing over it? And again, for many people, it tends to be the talk test. If you are going by the numbers, because I will throw that out there, general equation is first finding your max heart rate, which is generally like 220 minus your age, and then going somewhere around 65-ish% of that number may be what you can use for zone 2 if you need a general place to start. And last thing I'll say on this before we wrap it up and bring it home is the more fit that you become, and when I say fit in terms of this, the better aerobic base that you build, your zone 2 will likely go up. So as you are if you're somebody who's not fit, if you're somebody who has not really put a whole lot of effort into building any sort of a cardiovascular base, you can be somebody who lifts weights very, very regularly. And also, if you have not focused on building your actual aerobic base, you could find that your zone 2, it can be very difficult for you to stay in zone 2, and your heart rate automatically just spikes the minute your foot touches the pedal on a bike. That's a sign that you may be neglecting zone 2. So that's something, making sure that you've got that just generally as part of your overall fitness routine. All right, so let's go ahead and bring things home here. I'll keep it very short and sweet. Just want to remind you here that the intention of zone 2 is really to expand what I'll call the margins of your life. So we're thinking energy, recovery, your just overall patience, because sometimes it can be kind of boring work. There's a strength carryover, and then hopefully, long-term heart health. I will readily say that for the most part, it tends to be very unglamorous work, but it does build the kind of fitness and cardiovascular health and the aerobic base that adults really actually need. So the whole purpose is to really build capacity. That is the whole idea as far as what the mindset that I bring into why I will recommend for folks to do zone 2. It's all about building capacity. All right, so with that, we are going to bring this episode to a close. So if you have listened this long, I truly appreciate it. So if you do have comments, questions, concerns, feedback, anything like that, hit me up. You can hit me up on Instagram. It's at Coach JK McLeod, MCLEOD, or you can email me, jk@jkmcleod.com. So thank you again for listening to another fitness-focused episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.